Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Perfect Life Hidden Cracks. Craig Cooper adjusted his tie in the hotel mirror, watching his wife Lori pack their suitcases with methodical precision. After 3 years of marriage, he still marveled at how organized she was. Every item folded perfectly, every detail planned. Their honeymoon anniversary trip to Paris had been her idea, complete with restaurant reservations and museum tickets booked months in advance. Most people would call this obsessive, Craig teased, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. Lori laughed, that musical sound that had first caught his attention at a charity auction 4 years ago. Most people don't have a husband who forgets his passport until the last minute. Craig kissed her neck, breathing in her familiar jasmine perfume. At 35, he thought his bachelor days were behind him for good after his devastating divorce from his college sweetheart. Then Lori Guzman had walked into his architectural firm, claiming she needed someone to design her new art gallery. 6 months later, she'd moved in. A year after that, they were married. "I still can't believe you convinced me to take 2 weeks off," he said, releasing her to finish packing his own bag with considerably less care. "You've been working 18-hour days for months. The Morrison project will still be there when we get back." Lori zipped her suitcase shut with a satisfied smile. "Besides, when's the last time you did something just for fun?" Craig paused, realizing he couldn't remember. After his father's construction company collapsed 5 years ago, taking the family's reputation and life savings with it, Craig had thrown himself into building his architecture practice. Success had come, but at a cost. He'd isolated himself, trusted no one completely. Until Lori. She was different, patient, understanding. She never pushed about his past, never questioned why he kept certain friends at arm's length or why he sometimes worked late just to avoid going home to an empty apartment. When his mother had died 2 years ago, Lori had handled all the funeral arrangements without being asked. When his father's former business partner, Blake Root, had tried to muscle in on one of Craig's projects, Lori had been there with quiet support and practical advice. "You're thinking too hard again," Lori said, straightening his collar. "This is supposed to be a vacation, right? No work talk, no stress, just us and the city of light. And the city of love," she added with a grin that made his chest tight with affection. As they wheeled their luggage toward the door, Craig caught sight of their wedding photo on the dresser. He looked genuinely happy in it, happier than he'd been in years. Lori radiated joy beside him, her dark hair swept up, her smile brilliant. His family had been decimated by then, his mother fighting cancer, his father drinking himself to death with guilt over the business failure. But Lori had filled that void, created a new family for him. "Ready for our second first time in Paris?" she asked, using their private joke. They'd taken their honeymoon there, but spent most of it in their hotel room. More than ready. The taxi ride to LAX was comfortable, filled with Lori's excited chatter about the restaurants she'd researched and the art exhibitions they'd see. Craig found himself relaxing for the first time in months, already mentally disconnecting from the office emails piling up on his phone. They moved through check-in smoothly. Lori had already handled their seat assignments and upgraded them to business class as an anniversary surprise. At security, she handed him his boarding pass and passport with an efficient smile. "I don't deserve you," he said, meaning it. "No," she agreed playfully, "but you're stuck with me anyway." The security line moved quickly. Craig went through first, collecting his shoes and laptop bag on the other side. He turned to watch Lori approach the TSA checkpoint, her movements graceful even in the awkward shuffle of airport security. The agent was a middle-aged black man with kind eyes and steady hands. Joel Dillon, according to his name tag. He took Lori's passport with the bored efficiency of someone who'd done this thousands of times. Craig was putting on his shoes when he noticed Joel had stopped moving. The agent stared at his screen, then at Lori's passport, then back at the screen. His expression shifted from bored to confused to alarmed in the space of seconds. "Ma'am, I need you to step aside," Joel said, his voice carefully neutral. "Is there a problem?" Lori asked, and Craig heard something in her tone he'd never heard before, a slight tremor, quickly suppressed. Just a routine secondary screening. Sir, Joel called to Craig. I need to speak with you. Craig approached the checkpoint, his stomach beginning to knot. What's going on? Joel's eyes flicked between Craig and Lori. Then he made a decision. Sir, I need you to step over here. Away from your wife. What? What? Please, sir. Just for a moment. Craig looked back at Lori, who was being escorted to a separate area by another agent. She gave him what was probably meant to be a reassuring smile, but her face had gone pale. Joel led Craig to a corner near the checkpoint, out of earshot of other passengers. The agent's hand was shaking slightly as he pulled Craig aside. Sir, I need to ask you something, and I need you to listen carefully. Are you traveling willingly with this woman? Of course I am. She's my wife. What kind of question is that? Joel glanced around nervously, then leaned closer. Sir, do not get on this flight. Walk away and do not look back. Craig stared at him. What are you talking about? I've been doing this job for 12 years. I've never seen anything like this. Whatever's going on here, it's beyond my pay grade. Way beyond. No one can help you if you get on that plane. You're not making any sense. Help me with what? Joel hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. He angled his screen so Craig could see it. This is what came up when I scanned her passport. Craig looked at the screen and felt the world tilt beneath his feet. Red text filled the display. Interpol, red notice. Armed and extremely dangerous. Do not approach. Contact federal authorities immediately. But it wasn't the text that made Craig's blood turn to ice. It was the photo staring back at him. Lori's face, but with different hair, different clothes, and a different name. Elena Kozlov, wanted for conspiracy, human trafficking, and multiple homicides. That's impossible, Craig whispered. This has to be a mistake. Joel's expression was grim with sympathy. Sir, there's more. This passport she's carrying, it's a forgery. A good one, but still fake. Her real name is Elena Kozlov, and she's wanted by 3 different countries. Craig's mind reeled. 3 years of marriage. 3 years of sharing a bed, a home, a life. 3 years of trusting someone completely, and it had all been a lie. How long has this been active? He asked, his voice sounding strange and distant. The notice? 7 years. The last update was. Joel squinted at the screen. 6 months ago, someone added information about her being in the United States under the alias Lori Guzman. 6 months ago, right around the time they'd started planning this trip. Craig looked across the security area to where Lori, Elena, was waiting, and for just a moment her mask slipped. She was watching him with cold, calculating eyes, and when she saw him looking, her expression shifted back to concerned confusion so smoothly it was like watching a professional actress. Sir, Joel said urgently, whatever you're thinking, don't. Walk away. Let's handle this. But Craig was already thinking, his architect's mind beginning to process this information like any other complex problem. Someone had tipped off Interpol about Elena being in the U.S. Someone had been watching, waiting. And Elena, God, he couldn't think of her as Lori anymore. Had planned this trip as what? An escape route? A final score? Thank you, Craig said to Joel, his voice steadier than he felt. You may have just saved my life. As he walked back toward where Elena waited, Craig's mind was already working. She'd married him for a reason. People like her didn't do anything without a purpose. He'd been played, manipulated, used. But the game wasn't over yet. He was Craig Cooper, son of a man who'd built an empire from nothing before losing it all. He'd survived his father's fall, his mother's death, and clawed his way back to success through intelligence and determination. Elena Kozlov was about to learn that she'd chosen the wrong mark. Chapter 2. The Unraveling. Craig forced his expression into worried confusion as he approached Elena. Every step felt surreal. How many times had he walked toward his wife with love in his heart? Now he was walking toward a stranger wearing her face. What did he want? Elena asked, her voice pitched perfectly to convey concerned innocence. Something about routine security protocols, Craig replied, amazed at how steady his own voice sounded. They said it might be a few minutes. Elena nodded, but Craig caught the flash of calculation in her eyes before she looked down at her phone. She was typing rapidly. To whom? I'm going to use the restroom while we wait, Craig said. Good idea. This might take a while. Elena didn't look up from her phone. Craig walked toward the restrooms, but ducked into an alcove near a coffee stand instead. His hands were shaking as he called his business partner and closest friend, Wes Hopkins. Craig, aren't you supposed to be on a plane to Paris? Wes, I need you to listen carefully. Don't ask questions, just do exactly what I tell you. Go to my house right now. Check if anything's missing, documents, files, anything from my office. And Wes. Craig paused. Go armed. Jesus, Craig, what's happening? I can't explain now. Just, if Lori calls you, don't tell her I contacted you. In fact, don't answer her calls at all. Craig, please. I'll explain everything later. But right now, I need to know what she's taken. Craig hung up and immediately called his bank. It took several transfers and his full account information, but finally he reached someone who could check his accounts in real time. Mr. Cooper, all your accounts show normal activity. No unusual withdrawals or transfers. What about my wife? She's authorized on the accounts. Let me check. Yes, Mrs. Cooper made a wire transfer this morning for $50,000 to an account in the Cayman Islands. Craig closed his eyes. How long has she been authorized on my accounts? Since your marriage 3 years ago. She was added by your request. A request he barely remembered making during the whirlwind of combining their lives. How many other access points had he given her? I need to freeze all accounts immediately. My wife is not who I thought she was. Craig spent 10 precious minutes on security protocols, freezing assets, and changing passwords. When he returned to the security area, Elena was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. I don't care what it takes, she was saying in a voice nothing like her usual warm tone. The timeline has moved up. We need to be gone before. She spotted Craig and immediately switched back to her concerned wife persona. Well, thank goodness, honey, you're back. I was just calling my gallery manager to let her know about the delay. Gallery manager, right? Craig realized he'd never actually met anyone from Elena's supposed art gallery. He'd never even been to the building she claimed to own. Joel caught Craig's eye from the checkpoint and nodded toward a side office. It was time. Ma'am, Joel called to Elena. We're ready for you now. Elena's phone buzzed with a text. Craig caught a glimpse of the message. Abort. They know. Exit Protocol 7. Elena read the message, and for just a split second, her mask dropped completely. The woman who looked back at Craig was someone he'd never seen before. Cold, professional, dangerous. Then the mask slipped back into place. Actually, Elena said with a bright smile, I just realized I left something in the car. Craig, honey, would you mind if we push the flight back? I know it's a hassle, but no problem at all, Craig said. Why don't you go get whatever you forgot? I'll handle rebooking our flights. Elena hesitated. This wasn't going according to whatever plan she had. You don't mind coming with me? I should probably stay here and deal with the airline. You know how these rebooking situations can be. Craig saw Joel positioning himself between Elena and the exit. Other security personnel were casually moving into position. Elena noticed too. On second thought, Elena said, her voice taking on a new edge, maybe we should just forget the whole trip. Forget it. Craig let confusion color his voice. But you've been planning this for months. You said it was our second honeymoon. Plans change. Elena was backing toward the exit now, and Craig could see the calculation in her movements. She was preparing to run. Elena, Craig said quietly. She froze. He'd used her real name. I think we need to talk. Elena's hand moved to her purse, and Craig saw Joel tense. How many weapons was she carrying? How many people had she hurt? I don't know what you think you know, Elena said, her voice now carrying a slight accent Craig had never heard before. Russian, maybe. I know enough. Craig stepped closer, keeping his voice low. I know about the red notice. I know about the wire transfer this morning. I know Lori Guzman doesn't exist. Elena's laugh was nothing like Lori's musical sound. This was harsh, calculating. You know nothing, Craig Cooper. You never did. Then tell me. Tell me why you married me. Tell me what this was all about. This, Elena gestured between them. This was business. Nothing more. The words hit Craig like physical blows, but he kept his expression steady. What kind of business? Elena glanced around the security area, weighing her options. Joel and his team were closing in, but she still had space to move. Your father, she said finally, destroyed a lot of people when his company collapsed. People who had invested everything. People who lost their homes, their life savings. Craig's blood chilled. What does my father have to do with this? Blake Root was one of those investors. Did you know that? He put $2 million into Cooper Construction, money that belonged to some very dangerous people. When your father's Ponzi scheme collapsed, Blake had to find other ways to pay his debts. My father didn't run a Ponzi scheme. The business failed because of the housing market crash. Elena's smile was predatory. Is that what you told yourself? Poor Craig, so naive. Your father was stealing from Peter to pay Paul for years. Blake Root has the evidence to prove it. The world seemed to tilt. Craig had rebuilt his entire life on the foundation that his father was an honest man destroyed by circumstances beyond his control. You're lying. Am I? Ask yourself why Blake Root keeps trying to work with you. Why he's so interested in your projects. He's been waiting for the right moment to collect on your father's debt. With interest. And where do you fit in? I was supposed to get close to you, learn about your assets, your business connections. Make sure you were worth Blake's patience. Elena's voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. The marriage was thorough research. Craig felt something break inside him, but he kept it off his face. And now the timeline has accelerated. Blake needs his money immediately, and you're going to provide it, one way or another. Joel was within 10 feet now, speaking quietly into his radio. Elena saw him and made her decision. You should have gotten on that plane, Craig. It would have been easier for everyone. She moved fast, her hand coming out of her purse with something small and dark. But Craig was faster, his architect's spatial awareness allowing him to predict her movement. He grabbed her wrist as she brought up what looked like a small pistol. Gun! Joel shouted, and suddenly the security area exploded into motion. Elena twisted in Craig's grip with professional efficiency. But Craig had spent years working construction sites with his father. He was stronger than he looked. They struggled for a moment before Joel and two other agents reached them. Elena went limp suddenly, but Craig didn't release her wrist. He'd seen that trick in movies. Smart, Elena said as the TSA agents cuffed her. Maybe you're not as naive as I thought. As I led her away, Elena looked back at Craig one more time. Blake Root is still out there, Craig, and he's not going to stop just because I'm in custody. You cost him his best asset. That makes you an even bigger problem than before. Craig watched his wife, his fake wife, disappear into TSA custody and try to process what had just happened. 3 years of his life had been a lie. Every kiss, every shared meal, every intimate moment. All carefully orchestrated manipulation. His phone buzzed. Wes. Craig, you need to get home. Now. Your house has been torn apart, and someone's been through every file in your home office. Also, Wes paused. There's someone here who says he needs to talk to you about Blake Root. Says his name is Jimmy Quinn and that you're in serious danger. Craig looked around the airport security area, suddenly aware that Elena might not have been working alone. How many other people were watching him right now? I'm on my way, he said. And Wes, make sure Quinn is who he says he is before you let your guard down. As Craig walked back through the airport toward the exit, he realized his old life was over. The question now was whether he'd survive long enough to build a new one. Chapter 3. The Truth About Blake Root. Craig's hands gripped the steering wheel as he navigated Los Angeles traffic, his mind racing faster than his Honda Accord could carry him home. Every few minutes, he caught himself checking the rearview mirror, looking for signs of pursuit. Elena's warning echoed in his head. Blake Root is still out there. The drive from LAX to his Pasadena home normally took 40 minutes. Craig made it in 28, running 2 red lights and taking shortcuts through residential neighborhoods. When he pulled into his driveway, he immediately noticed Wes's pickup truck and an unfamiliar black sedan parked on the street. The front door was unlocked. Craig walked in to find his living room destroyed. Couch cushions slashed open, bookcases emptied, even the floorboards pried up in places. This wasn't random burglary. This was a systematic search. Craig, Wes's voice called from the kitchen. Craig found his business partner sitting at the kitchen table across from a man he'd never seen before. The stranger was maybe 50, with graying hair and the kind of lean, alert posture that screamed law enforcement or military. He wore a simple black suit and had hard eyes that evaluated Craig from head to toe as he entered the room. "Craig Cooper," the stranger said, rising to offer his hand. "Jimmy Quinn, FBI Financial Crimes Division. We need to talk." Craig shook the offered hand cautiously. "How do I know you're really FBI?" Quinn smiled grimly and produced his credentials. They looked authentic, but Craig had just discovered his wife was a master forger. "Fair question, considering what you've been through today. TSA alerted us when they arrested Elena Kozlov. We've been tracking her for 18 months. 18 months. Craig sank into a chair. "She's been under surveillance for 18 months, and you didn't warn me?" "We weren't sure what your involvement was," Quinn said bluntly. "Elena Kozlov is a world-class grifter. She's been married 7 times under different identities. Usually, the husbands are complicit. Usually, 3 of her previous husbands died in accidents after transferring significant assets to offshore accounts. 2 more are serving time for crimes they probably didn't commit. We had to be sure you weren't another willing accomplice." Wes leaned forward. "Craig, this guy knows things about Blake Root that you need to hear." Quinn opened a file folder on the table. "Blake Root isn't just a failed businessman trying to recoup losses from your father's company. He's been running a sophisticated money laundering operation for Eastern European crime syndicates for over a decade." Craig stared at the documents Quinn spread across the table. Bank records, wire transfers, surveillance photos. "That's impossible. Blake's been working construction in Los Angeles for 20 years. His construction business is legitimate," Quinn agreed. "It's also the perfect front for moving dirty money. He inflates project costs, creates fictional subcontractors, bills for materials that don't exist. Last year alone, he washed over $40 million through his various companies." "What does this have to do with my father?" Quinn pulled out another document, a bank statement from Cooper Construction dating back 6 years. "Your father discovered Blake's operation by accident. He was doing a joint project with Root Development and noticed discrepancies in their billing. Being an honest man, he threatened to report it." Craig's stomach dropped. "And Blake couldn't risk exposure, so he destroyed your father's company instead. The housing market crash provided perfect cover. He manipulated your father's loans, called in debts early, even bribed building inspectors to delay permits on crucial projects." Wes whistled low. "Jesus. Your father never ran a Ponzi scheme," Quinn continued. "Blake Root systematically dismantled Cooper Construction to protect his money laundering operation. Your father died thinking he was a failure, never knowing he'd been targeted for being too honest." Craig felt anger building in his chest, hot and clean. His father had spent his last 2 years drowning in guilt and alcohol, convinced he destroyed his family's legacy through poor business decisions. The truth was so much worse. "Elena told me Blake needed money immediately," Craig said. "Why now?" His Eastern European partners are losing patience. They've had some major busts in the past year. Lost shipments, arrested associates. They're demanding their money back with interest. Blake's desperate, so he sent Elena to marry me and steal everything I have. More complicated than that. Quinn pulled out a surveillance photo of Craig and Elena at their wedding. "Elena's specialty isn't just theft, it's elimination. Our analysis suggests Blake intended for Elena to marry you, transfer your assets, then arrange for your death to look like suicide. The grieving widow would inherit everything and disappear." The room fell silent. Craig stared at his wedding photo, remembering how happy he'd felt that day, how grateful he'd been to find love again. "Something changed the timeline," Quinn continued. "We think Blake's partners gave him an ultimatum. Instead of the slow burn they'd planned, they needed immediate results. That's why Elena tried to get me on the plane to Paris," Craig realized. "What was supposed to happen there?" "Paris has no extradition treaties with 3 countries where Elena has active warrants. Our guess is you would have had an accident within the first few days. Elena would have claimed your body and inherited everything as your widow." Wes stood up abruptly and walked to the window. "This is insane. We're talking about professional killers." "Which brings us to your current problem," Quinn said. "Elena's in federal custody, But Blake still needs that money. With his primary asset compromised, he's going to have to improvise. Meaning he's probably going to try to kill you directly and forge documents to access your accounts. Quinn's voice was matter-of-fact. Or kidnap you and force you to transfer the funds yourself. Craig looked around his destroyed living room. They've already been here. This wasn't Blake's people, Quinn said. This was Elena's backup plan. She had partners here in LA, probably Russian mob connections. When she missed her check-in, they came looking for anything that might help them complete the job. Great. So I have both Blake Root and the Russian mob after me. It gets worse, Quinn said grimly. Blake knows we're onto him now. That makes him unpredictable. Desperate criminals make poor decisions, which makes them dangerous to everyone around them. Craig stood up and began pacing. So what are my options? Witness protection. We can't guarantee your safety in witness protection if Blake has mob connections. These people are patient and well-funded. Then what? Quinn closed his file folder. Honestly, your best chance is to help us bring Blake down. We've been building a case against him for 3 years, but we need someone on the inside. Inside, Wes turned from the window. You want Craig to go undercover? Blake's been trying to work with Craig for months, right? Ever since Elena reported back that Craig was a viable target. If Craig approached Blake now, claiming Elena had cheated him out of money and he wanted revenge, you want me to pretend to be a bitter ex-husband looking for payback? Craig said, Blake respects money and ruthlessness. If you convinced him you wanted to partner with him against Elena, maybe even help him access her hidden assets, that's insane, Wes said. Craig's an architect, not an undercover agent. Quinn looked at Craig carefully. What do you think? Craig was quiet for a long moment, thinking Blake Root had destroyed his father, corrupted his marriage, and tried to have him killed. The conventional approach would be to hide, let the FBI handle it, hope for the best. But Craig had been running and hiding since his father's business collapsed. He'd built his new life carefully, quietly, trying not to attract attention. That approach had made him the perfect target. What I need to do? Craig asked. Craig, Wes protested. Blake's expecting you to be devastated, confused, probably seeking answers, Quinn said. If you approached him claiming Elena had stolen money from you and you wanted help getting it back, he'd see an opportunity to manipulate me again. Exactly. We'd wire you up, get you into Blake's operation. Once we have evidence of his money laundering activities, you'd have enough to put him away. Quinn nodded. Life in federal prison, minimum, and his mob partners would be too busy covering their own assets to worry about revenge. Craig looked around his destroyed home one more time. Every photo had been pulled from its frame, every drawer emptied. They'd even torn up the floorboards where he kept his father's old business files. His father had tried to do the right thing and been destroyed for it. Craig had tried to build a quiet, successful life and been targeted for it. Maybe it was time to try a different approach. What do I need to know about Blake Root? Craig asked. Quinn smiled grimly and reopened his file folder. Everything. Chapter 4. The Devil's Details. The FBI safe house in Glendale was a nondescript 2-bedroom ranch that looked like every other house on the block. For the past 2 days, Craig had been living there while Quinn and his team prepared him for what they were calling Operation Payback. Blake Root is paranoid, but he's also greedy, Quinn explained as they went over surveillance photos for the 10th time. That combination makes him predictable in some ways, dangerous in others. Craig studied a photo of Blake taken outside his Beverly Hills office building. Even in the grainy surveillance image, Blake looked exactly as Craig remembered, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of commanding presence that made people trust him with their money. The perfect con man's facade. His weakness is that he believes everyone else is as corrupt as he is, Quinn continued. When you approach him, he won't be suspicious of your motives. He'll be calculating how to use you. And if he realizes I'm working with you, then you'll probably end up like Elena's previous husbands, Quinn said bluntly. Which is why this plan has to be perfect. Craig's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Cooper, this is Blake Root's assistant. Mr. Root would like to meet with you today at 2 p.m. to discuss a business opportunity. Please confirm. Quinn grinned. He's taking the bait. They'd spent yesterday setting the hook. Craig had made several carefully placed phone calls, ostensibly to friends, but actually to people Quinn knew would pass information to Blake's network. The story was simple. Craig Cooper's wife had cleaned out his accounts and disappeared, leaving him financially ruined and furious. Remember, Quinn said as they did a final equipment check, Blake's office is likely equipped with surveillance detection equipment. The wire we're using is state-of-the-art, but if he sweeps you... I know. Stay calm, stick to the story, and remember that my life depends on selling this performance. Craig looked at himself in the bathroom mirror. He'd deliberately skipped shaving and had been living on coffee and stress for 2 days. He looked exactly like a man whose world had fallen apart, which, in many ways, he was. The recording device was a tiny chip sewn into the collar of his shirt, barely larger than a button. Quinn assured him it was undetectable, but Craig felt like it was glowing like a neon sign. Craig, Quinn said as they prepared to leave, if at any point you feel like you're in immediate danger, just say the phrase, I need to call my lawyer. We'll be listening, and we'll come in immediately. And if Blake decides to kill me before I can say anything, then this plan was a mistake, and I'll spend the rest of my career feeling guilty about it. Craig appreciated the honesty, if not the sentiment. Blake Root's office was on the 15th floor of a Century City high-rise, all glass and chrome and expensive views. His receptionist, a young blonde who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine, escorted Craig to an office that probably cost more to furnish than most people made in a year. Blake rose from behind a mahogany desk the size of a small car, his smile perfectly calibrated to convey sympathy and opportunity in equal measure. Craig, my boy, you look terrible. I heard about what happened with Lori. I'm so sorry. Blake's handshake lingered just a moment too long, and Craig caught him glancing toward a small device on his desk that was probably recording their conversation. Thank you for seeing me, Blake. I wasn't sure who else to turn to. Sit. Can Monica get you anything? Coffee? Something stronger. Craig took the offered chair, noting that it was positioned so Blake could see his hands at all times. Coffee would be great. While Monica prepared coffee from an elaborate machine in the corner, Blake settled back behind his desk with the practiced ease of a man conducting a job interview. So, Blake said once they were alone, tell me what really happened. Craig had rehearsed this story dozens of times, but now, sitting across from a man who destroyed his father, it took all his self-control to keep his voice steady. Lori cleaned out our joint accounts 2 days ago. $50,000 transferred to some offshore account. When I confronted her at the airport, she laughed and told me it was all a game, that I was just a mark. At the airport, she was trying to get me on a flight to Paris. Said it was our anniversary trip. Craig let bitterness creep into his voice. Turns out she had a different kind of trip planned. Blake leaned forward with apparent interest. What do you mean? The TSA agent showed me her passport. Her real passport. Lori Guzman doesn't exist. Her name is Elena, something Russian. She's wanted by Interpol. Elena Kozlov, Blake said quietly. Craig looked up sharply. You know her? Blake was quiet for a moment, clearly calculating. I know of her. She's a specialist. A specialist in what? Acquiring assets from wealthy individuals. Blake's tone was carefully neutral. I may have used her services once or twice in the past. The admission hit Craig like a physical blow. Blake wasn't even pretending to be innocent. You hired her to rob me? Rob is such an ugly word, Blake said smoothly. I hired her to collect on a debt. What debt? Blake stood and walked to the window, gazing out at the Los Angeles skyline. Your father cost me a great deal of money, Craig. $2 million, to be exact. Money that belonged to some very unforgiving people. Craig forced himself to sound confused rather than angry. My father's business failed because of the housing crash. That wasn't his fault. Your father's business failed because he threatened to expose my operation to federal authorities, Blake said calmly. I couldn't allow that to happen. The casual admission of guilt was stunning. Blake was confessing to destroying Cooper Construction like he was discussing the weather. So you decided to destroy his company? I decided to protect my interests. Your father was collateral damage. Craig gripped the arms of his chair. He died thinking he was a failure. He died being a failure. The only difference is that I helped him along. Blake turned back to Craig with something that might have been sympathy. But that's the past. The question now is what we do about the future. What do you mean? Blake returned to his desk and opened a file folder. Elena Kozlov is in federal custody, which means she won't be returning the money she stole from you. Or from me, for that matter. She stole from you too? Elena was supposed to deliver your assets to me as partial payment on your father's debt. Instead, she appears to have decided to retire on her own terms. Blake's smile was cold. That leaves both of us out our money. Craig could hardly believe what he was hearing. Blake was openly admitting to conspiracy, theft, and worse. What are you proposing? Elena Kozlov has been very successful over the years. Our intelligence suggests she has at least $10 million hidden in various offshore accounts. Blake leaned forward. If we could access those accounts, you're the aggrieved husband. You have legal standing to claim her assets as part of a divorce settlement. With the right legal maneuvering and the right pressure applied in the right places, we could recover everything she's stolen. From both of us. Craig pretended to consider this. What kind of pressure? Elena has partners, associates who helped her with her various projects, people who know where her money is hidden. Blake's tone turned businesslike. Some of those people are currently in situations where they might be persuaded to cooperate. You're talking about threatening people. I'm talking about recovering stolen assets through aggressive negotiation. The euphemism was chilling. Craig realized Blake was proposing to torture information out of Elena's associates. I'm not sure I'm comfortable with. Craig, Blake interrupted, his voice taking on a harder edge. Elena Kozlov played you for a fool, stole your money, and probably planned to kill you once she drained your accounts. Comfort is a luxury you can't afford. Blake opened his desk drawer and pulled out a manila envelope. These are photographs from Elena's previous marriages. Take a look. Craig opened the envelope and immediately wished he hadn't. The photos showed crime scenes, bodies, blood, police tape. Elena's previous husbands. She's killed before. Blake said unnecessarily. The only reason you're alive is that we interrupted her timeline. Do you really want to show her mercy? Craig stared at the photographs, genuine revulsion making his performance easier. How do we find her associates? Blake smiled, and Craig saw the predator beneath the businessman's facade. Leave that to me. The question is, are you prepared to do whatever it takes to get your money back? Craig met Blake's eyes. Whatever it takes. Excellent. Blake closed the envelope and returned it to his drawer. I think this is the beginning of a very profitable partnership. As Craig left Blake's office 20 minutes later, his head was spinning. Blake had not only confessed to destroying Cooper Construction, he'd outlined a plan that involved kidnapping and torturing Elena's associates. The wire had captured everything. But as Craig walked to his car, he realized the most terrifying part of the meeting wasn't Blake's casual admission of guilt. It was how convincing Craig had found his own performance as a man willing to commit torture for money. Maybe he wasn't as different from Blake Root as he'd thought. Chapter 5. Into the Darkness. The abandoned warehouse in San Pedro looked like 1,000 others scattered across Los Angeles' industrial landscape. Rusted corrugated metal, broken windows, weeds growing through cracked asphalt. Craig wouldn't have given it a second glance if Blake hadn't specifically directed him here. Are you getting this? Craig whispered, his lips barely moving as he spoke to the wire in his collar. Quinn's voice came through the tiny earpiece hidden in Craig's ear canal. Crystal clear. Remember, if things go south, we're 30 seconds away. Craig had spent the past week deeper undercover than Quinn's team had originally planned. Blake had been impressed by Craig's apparent willingness to pursue Elena's associates and had invited him into increasingly serious criminal discussions. The FBI was getting everything they needed to build their case, but the psychological toll on Craig was mounting. You're going to see some things today that might disturb you. Blake had warned him that morning. Elena's partners aren't the type to respond to polite requests for information. Now, as Craig approached the warehouse, he understood what Blake had meant. 2 black SUVs were parked outside, and Craig could see men in suits stationed at various points around the building. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an interrogation. Blake emerged from the warehouse with his usual commanding smile. But Craig noticed he was wearing clothes he could afford to throw away. Right on time. Come on, there's someone I want you to meet. Inside the warehouse, Craig's eyes adjusted to reveal a scene from his nightmares. A man was zip-tied to a chair in the center of the concrete floor, his face bloodied and swollen. Around him, three men in expensive suits were examining what looked like a toolbox full of implements Craig didn't want to identify. Craig Cooper, Blake said conversationally, meet Kelvin Maloney. Kelvin used to work with Elena on her various projects. The man in the chair looked up at Craig with eyes full of pain and desperation. Please, he said in accented English. I already told them everything I know. Blake gestured to one of his associates. A man Craig now knew was named Arturo Farley. Arturo, would you bring Mr. Maloney up to speed on what we've learned so far? Arturo consulted a tablet. Kelvin here confirms that Elena has been operating in Los Angeles for the past 4 years under the Lori Guzman identity. He helped her establish bank accounts, credit history, even the art gallery that served as her cover story. Craig felt sick. The art gallery he'd helped her design had been completely fictional. But, Blake continued, his voice hardening, Kelvin claims he doesn't know where Elena keeps her primary assets, which I find difficult to believe. I swear on my mother's grave, Kelvin said desperately. Elena never told any of us about the big money. We only handled the small stuff, the cover stories, the false identities. Blake nodded to another associate, a younger man who looked like he enjoyed his work too much. The man picked up what looked like a car battery with cables attached. Craig, Blake said, I want you to understand something. In my business, trust is earned through shared experience. What you're about to witness is how we earn trust. Quinn's voice was urgent in Craig's earpiece. Get out of there. Now, say the code phrase. But Craig couldn't move. If he left now, Blake would know he was working with the FBI. Everything they'd worked for would be lost, and Blake would disappear into the criminal underground where they'd never find him. Understand, Craig heard himself say. The young man with the battery approached Kelvin, who began pleading in what sounded like Russian. Craig forced himself to watch, knowing that his reaction would determine whether Blake trusted him. What followed was the longest 10 minutes of Craig's life. The systematic application of pain to extract information was worse than anything he'd seen in movies. But what disturbed Craig most was how methodical it was. These men had clearly done this before. Finally, Kelvin broke. Geneva, he screamed. Swiss account 847-7934-2847. The password is Moscow Nights. Please, no more. Blake smiled with satisfaction. See how easy that was? Kelvin, you could have saved us all a lot of time. Arturo was already on his phone, presumably having someone check the account information. After a few minutes, he nodded to Blake. $4.7 million, Arturo reported. Account's been active for 6 months. Excellent. Blake turned to Craig. Your wife was busier than we thought. Craig stared at Kelvin, who was sobbing with relief and pain. What happens to him now? That depends, Blake said, on whether there's anything else he hasn't told us. Over the next hour, they extracted information about 2 more accounts and the locations of several safe deposit boxes Elena had established around the city. By the time they were finished, Kelvin had given them access to over $12 million. This is just the beginning, Blake told Craig as they walked back toward the warehouse entrance. Elena has been working for 7 years. This can't be all of it. What about him? Craig nodded back toward Kelvin. He's outlived his usefulness. Craig's blood turned to ice. You're going to kill him? He's seen all of us. He knows too much about our operation. Blake's voice was matter-of-fact. Don't worry, it'll be quick. Blake, he gave us everything we wanted. Killing him seems what? Unprofessional. Blake stopped walking and studied Craig's face. I need to know that you understand the stakes here, Craig. This isn't a game. Elena's partners, the people we're going after, they won't hesitate to kill you if they get the chance. If you're squeamish about necessary business practices. Craig forced his voice to remain steady. I'm not squeamish. I'm practical. Dead bodies attract police attention. Blake's expression relaxed slightly. That's true. Arturo, make sure the body disappears completely. No traces. As they walked to their cars, Craig felt like he was walking through hell. In his earpiece, Quinn was giving him continuous reassurance that backup was ready to move in, but Craig knew that if he called for help now, Kelvin would die before the FBI could save him. "There's one more thing," Blake said as they reached Craig's car. "We've identified Elena's primary partner. Her handler, you might say. Someone who's been coordinating her activities for years." "Who?" "Stanley Ferguson. He runs a legitimate shipping business, but it's a front for moving people and money for Eastern European syndicates." Blake handed Craig a photograph. "We're going to pay him a visit tomorrow night." Craig looked at the photo. Ferguson looked like a grandfather. Gray hair, kind eyes, the type of man you'd trust to watch your children. "Ferguson knows where Elena keeps her primary assets," Blake continued. "The real money. But he's not going to be as easy to break as Kelvin." "Why not?" Blake's smile was cold. "Because Stanley Ferguson used to be KGB. Old school. He's been trained to resist interrogation." As Craig drove away from the warehouse, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, Quinn's voice was constant in his earpiece. "You did great, Craig. We got everything we need to put Blake away forever." But Craig wasn't thinking about the FBI's case anymore. He was thinking about Kelvin Maloney, who was probably dead by now. He was thinking about Stanley Ferguson, who would be tortured tomorrow night. He was thinking about how easily he'd stood there and watched a man be brutalized for information. Most of all, he was thinking about how Blake had looked at him with approval, as if Craig was finally becoming the kind of man Blake could respect. The worst part was that some small, dark corner of Craig's mind had felt pride in that approval. Chapter 6. The Point of No Return. Craig stood in his bathroom at 3 a.m., staring at his reflection and trying to wash the smell of the warehouse from his skin. No matter how hot he made the water, he couldn't get clean. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Kelvin Maloney's face, heard his screams. Quinn had called an emergency meeting at the safe house. When Craig arrived, he found the FBI agent pacing the kitchen, his usually calm demeanor cracked with tension. "We have a problem," Quinn said without preamble. "Stanley Ferguson is an undercover DEA agent." Craig felt the world tilt beneath his feet. "What?" "Ferguson's been deep undercover for 3 years, infiltrating the same Eastern European network that Elena works for. If Blake tortures him, Blake will discover he's law enforcement, and that will lead Blake directly back to you." Quinn ran his hands through his hair. "We have to pull you out. Tonight. What about Ferguson? We'll warn him. Get him to safety before Blake can make his move." Craig sat down heavily at the kitchen table. "And Blake? We'll have to settle for what we've got. The recordings from today should be enough to convict him on conspiracy and money laundering charges." "Should be." Quinn's expression was grim. "Blake's smart. He never explicitly ordered Kelvin's murder on tape. A good lawyer might argue that Blake was just questioning a theft suspect and things got out of hand." Craig stared at the FBI agent. "You're telling me that after everything, after watching Kelvin get tortured, after putting my life on the line for a week, Blake might walk free?" "He'll serve time," Quinn said defensively. "Maybe 10 years. 10 years. And then he's free to go back to destroying people's lives." "Craig, I understand your frustration, but..." "No." Craig stood up, his voice harder than he'd ever heard it. "You don't understand. Blake root destroyed my father. He killed my marriage. He was planning to have me murdered. And you want to let him bargain his way to a 10-year sentence. What are you suggesting?" Craig was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing. Blake expected him to participate in torturing Stanley Ferguson tomorrow night. What if Ferguson wasn't warned? What if Blake discovered Ferguson was DEA during the interrogation? What would happen if Blake killed a federal agent? Craig asked quietly. Quinn stared at him. That would be a capital crime. Life in prison minimum. Probably death penalty. And if it happened while I was wearing a wire. "Craig, you're not seriously suggesting." "I'm suggesting that maybe we let Blake hang himself." Craig's voice was steady now, his architect's mind working through the problem like any other structural challenge. "Ferguson is trained to resist interrogation, right? Former KGB. Yes, but so he can hold out long enough for us to get what we need on tape. Blake ordering a federal agent's murder, maybe even doing it himself." Quinn looked horrified. "You're talking about letting a DEA agent be tortured to build our case." I'm talking about stopping Blake Root permanently. Craig met Quinn's eyes. Ferguson knew the risks when he went undercover. Kelvin Maloney was just trying to make a living, and he's probably dead right now because I stood there and watched. Craig, listen to yourself. You're talking like what? Like Blake. Craig smiled grimly. Maybe that's what it takes to beat him. Maybe you have to be willing to go as far as he is. Quinn stood up abruptly. This conversation is over. I'm pulling you out tonight, and we're warning Ferguson immediately. And Blake escapes justice. Again, Blake will be arrested and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. For 10 years, while Elena's other victims stay dead, and Blake's mob partners move on to the next money launderer. Craig shook his head. I won't let that happen. You don't have a choice. This operation is officially terminated. Craig looked at Quinn for a long moment, then stood and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Home, Craig said. To pack. Like you ordered. But Craig didn't go home. Instead, he drove to a 24-hour diner in Hollywood and sat in a corner booth, drinking coffee and thinking. By dawn, he'd made his decision. At 9 a.m., he called Blake. I've been thinking about Ferguson, Craig said when Blake answered. You're right. Someone with KGB training won't break easily. No, he won't. That's why I'm bringing in some specialists. Russians who know how the old Soviet methods work. Craig felt his stomach clench, but kept his voice steady. I want to be there. Craig, what we're going to do to Ferguson, it's going to be worse than what happened to Kelvin. Much worse. I understand. Elena destroyed my life. Blake. Ferguson was part of that. I want to look him in the eye when he tells us where she hid the money. Blake was quiet for a moment. You've changed, Craig. A week ago, you were a soft architect who'd never hurt anyone. Now I understand what it takes to survive in your world. Yes, Blake said with obvious satisfaction. Yes, you do. Ferguson won't know what hit him. That evening, Craig drove to the new location Blake had specified, another warehouse, this one in Long Beach. But this time, he wasn't wearing an FBI wire. He disabled his phone and left it at home. As far as Quinn knew, Craig had gone aground and was preparing to flee Los Angeles. Blake was already at the warehouse when Craig arrived, along with Arturo and 3 men Craig didn't recognize. The new men looked like they'd stepped out of a Moscow back alley. Hard faces, expensive track suits, and the kind of casual brutality that didn't need to advertise itself. Craig, meet Dmitri and his associates, Blake said. They're going to help us have a conversation with Mr. Ferguson. The Russians looked Craig up and down with professional interest. One of them said something in Russian that made the others laugh. He says you don't look like muscle. Blake translated. I told him looks can be deceiving. Stanley Ferguson was brought in 20 minutes later, zip-tied and blindfolded, but not yet beaten. When they removed the blindfold, Craig saw intelligent eyes that immediately began cataloging faces and details. Ferguson was building a mental case file even as they prepared to torture him. Gentlemen, Blake said formally, meet Stanley Ferguson. Mr. Ferguson has been coordinating Elena Kozlov's activities for the past several years, and he's going to tell us where she keeps her money. Ferguson's eyes settled on Craig. Craig felt a stab of something, anger, embarrassment, pain. Elena's usual type ends up dead. Yes, they do. Ferguson's voice was calm, almost conversational. But you're still breathing. That makes you special. Blake nodded to Dmitri, who began unpacking a case of instruments that made the previous night's tools look primitive. Mr. Ferguson, Blake continued, I'm going to be direct. Elena Kozlov has at least $50 million hidden in various accounts. You're going to tell us how to access those accounts. Ferguson smiled. Or what? You'll torture me? He looked around the warehouse. I was interrogated by the KGB for 6 months in 1987. Your Russian friends here learned from my former colleagues. This should be interesting. Dmitri said something to Blake in Russian. Blake nodded. Dmitri says Ferguson is trying to establish psychological dominance through false confidence. It's a classic resistance technique. Let him try, Ferguson said calmly. I have all night. As Dmitri approached Ferguson with the first of his tools, Craig realized he'd made a terrible mistake. Ferguson wasn't just going to be tortured. He was going to be tortured by experts who enjoyed their work. And Craig was going to have to watch every second of it to maintain his cover. But it was too late to back out now. Blake was watching him carefully, evaluating his reactions. The slightest sign of weakness would blow Craig's cover and probably get him killed. As Dimitri began his work and Ferguson's screams echoed off the warehouse walls, Craig forced himself to watch. He cataloged every detail, memorized every face, recorded every confession Blake made while Ferguson was being broken. Because Craig had realized something during his sleepless night. He didn't need the FBI to get justice for his father. He just needed evidence. And by the time this night was over, he'd have enough evidence to destroy Blake Root completely, even if it destroyed Craig in the process. Chapter 7. The Trap Springs. 3 hours into Ferguson's interrogation, Craig finally understood why the DEA agent had lasted so long undercover. Even as Dimitri applied increasingly sophisticated torture techniques, Ferguson revealed information in calculated doses, enough to seem broken, but never quite enough to satisfy Blake's suspicions. "He's playing with us," Blake muttered to Craig as Dimitri took a break to examine his tools. "Ferguson's giving us account numbers that probably don't exist. How can you tell? Look at his eyes. He's still calculating, still thinking 3 moves ahead." Blake's voice took on a dangerous edge. Dimitri's about to escalate to permanent damage. If Ferguson doesn't start talking soon. Craig watched Ferguson, noting how the agent maintained eye contact despite his obvious pain. Ferguson was buying time, but for what? Did he somehow know the FBI was coming? That's when Craig realized Quinn hadn't given up on the operation. The FBI was probably surrounding the warehouse right now, waiting for the right moment to move in. All of Ferguson's resistance, all of his careful distribution of information, was designed to keep Blake talking long enough for backup to arrive. Which meant Craig was about to be caught in the middle of a federal raid, while deep undercover with no way to identify himself as an asset. "Blake," Craig said carefully, "maybe we should move this somewhere more secure." If Ferguson was important enough for the DEA to place undercover. The DEA? Blake spun around to stare at Craig. Craig realized his mistake immediately. He'd revealed knowledge he shouldn't have. I assumed, given how well trained he obviously is. Blake's eyes narrowed. "How did you know Ferguson was DEA, Craig?" The warehouse fell silent except for Ferguson's labored breathing. Arturo and the Russians were all staring at Craig now, their hands moving toward concealed weapons. Craig's mind raced. He could try to bluff, claim he'd made a lucky guess. But Blake was too smart, too paranoid. The moment of truth had arrived. "I think," Blake said quietly, "we need to have a different conversation." That's when Ferguson spoke up, his voice hoarse but clear, because Agent Craig Cooper has been working with the FBI for the past 2 weeks. The warehouse exploded into motion. Arturo drew a gun and pointed it at Craig's head. The Russians spread out to cover the exits. Blake pulled his own weapon, a small silver pistol that looked expensive and well-maintained. "Agent Cooper?" Blake's voice was deadly calm. "FBI." Craig looked at Ferguson, who met his eyes with something that might have been sympathy. The DEA agent had just sacrificed his cover to blow Craig's, probably saving Craig's life in the process. "I'm not FBI," Craig said, which was technically true. "I'm a civilian consultant." "Semantics," Blake said. "You've been wearing a wire." "Not tonight." Craig spread his arms to show he wasn't armed. "Quinn pulled me off the operation yesterday. I came here on my own." Blake studied Craig's face for a long moment. "Why?" "Because 10 years in federal prison isn't enough. Not for what you did to my father." Blake actually laughed. "Revenge? After all this, it comes down to simple revenge. You destroyed everything my father built. You made him die thinking he was a failure. And you were going to have your pet psychopath kill me after she'd stolen everything I owned. So you decided to infiltrate my operation and bring me down personally." Blake lowered his gun slightly. "I have to admit, Craig, I'm impressed. You had me completely fooled. The FBI has recordings of you confessing to destroying Cooper Construction," Craig continued. "They have evidence of your money laundering operation. Even if you kill me tonight, you're finished." "Maybe. But if I'm going to prison, I might as well make it worthwhile." Blake raised his gun again. "Goodbye, Craig Cooper." That's when the warehouse lights exploded in a shower of sparks. plunging them into darkness. Craig dove to his left as Blake's gun fired, the muzzle flash temporarily blinding everyone. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in hellish red shadows. FBI! FBI! Get on the ground! The warehouse filled with tactical officers in full combat gear. Craig found himself face down on the concrete, with someone's knee in his back and zip ties around his wrists before he could identify himself. "Agent Cooper is friendly," he heard Ferguson yell. "Agent Cooper is an asset." The knee left Craig's back, and someone cut his zip ties. He rolled over to see Quinn kneeling beside him, his face grim with relief and anger. "Are you completely insane?" Quinn demanded. "You could have gotten yourself killed." "Where's Blake?" Quinn helped Craig to his feet and pointed toward the far corner of the warehouse, where Blake was being treated by paramedics. "Caught some shrapnel when we blew the lights. He'll live to stand trial." Craig walked over to where Blake lay on a stretcher, his expensive suit torn and bloody. Blake looked up at Craig with something that might have been respect. "You played this well, Craig. Better than I expected. This isn't about the game, Blake. This is about justice." "Justice?" Blake's laugh turned into a cough. "You stood there and watched me torture two people. You participated in kidnapping and conspiracy to commit murder. What makes you think you're any different from me now?" Craig stared down at the man who destroyed his father's life and nearly destroyed his own. "The difference is that I'll have to live with what I've done. You never care about the people you hurt." Noble sentiment. Let's see how noble you feel when you're testifying about tonight in court. When Elena's victims' families ask why you didn't try to stop me sooner. Blake was loaded into an ambulance a few minutes later, still conscious and still smiling his predatory smile. Craig watched the ambulance drive away, feeling hollow rather than victorious. "Ferguson's going to be fine," Quinn said, joining Craig outside the warehouse. "Tough bastard. Says he's been through worse in Moscow." And Elena? Still in federal custody. With Blake's confession and Ferguson's testimony, she'll never see the outside of a prison cell. Craig nodded absently, his mind already racing ahead to the trials, the testimony, the media attention that would follow. His quiet life as an architect was over. His name would be forever linked to this case. "Craig," Quinn said quietly, "for what it's worth, you did the right thing. Blake Root was a cancer. Sometimes you have to cut deep to remove cancer completely." Craig looked back at the warehouse, where crime scene investigators were already documenting evidence. The ends justify the means? In this case? Yeah, I think they do. As Craig drove home through the empty streets of Los Angeles, he tried to feel victorious. Blake Root was finished. Elena would spend the rest of her life in prison. Justice had been served. But all Craig could think about was Blake's final question. What made him any different from the people he'd helped bring down? The answer, Craig realized, was that he wasn't sure there was a difference anymore. Chapter 8. Revelations and Reckonings. The Los Angeles County Courthouse was a circus of media attention 3 months later when Blake Root's trial began. Craig sat in the witness waiting room, reviewing his testimony notes for the 5th time that morning, trying to ignore the reporters shouting questions through the security glass. "Mr. Cooper, is it true you participated in the torture of 2 federal agents? How do you respond to claims that you enjoyed watching the interrogations? Are you worried about retaliation from Blake Root's criminal associates?" Quinn appeared at Craig's elbow, coffee in hand and irritation on his face. "The media's having a field day with this. Blake's defense team is pushing the narrative that you went rogue, that everything you did was unauthorized." "It was unauthorized," Craig pointed out. "Technically, yes, but you were still acting as our asset when you gathered most of the evidence." Quinn sat down beside Craig. "The recordings we have of Blake confessing to destroying your father's company, those are going to put him away for life. And the torture charges? Those are trickier. Blake's lawyers are claiming he was conducting legitimate interrogations of suspected criminals. They're painting Kelvin Maloney as a willing accomplice and Ferguson as a deep-cover criminal, not a DEA agent." Craig looked up from his notes. "They can do that. They could try. But we have Blake on tape ordering Maloney's murder, and Ferguson's credentials are solid." Quinn paused. "The question is how the jury reacts to your role in all this. Before Craig could respond, a bailiff appeared. "Mr. Cooper, you're up." The courtroom was packed with reporters, federal agents, and spectators drawn by the sensational nature of the case. Blake sat at the defense table in an expensive suit, looking every inch the successful businessman rather than the criminal mastermind he actually was. His eyes found Craig's as Craig walked to the witness stand, and his smile was as coldly predatory as ever. The prosecution's questioning was straightforward, established Craig's background, his relationship with Elena, and his discovery that she was working for Blake. Craig had practiced these answers dozens of times, and he delivered them clearly and calmly. Then Blake's defense attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Elizabeth Parsons, began her cross-examination. "Mr. Cooper, you've testified that you were working with the FBI to gather evidence against my client. Is that accurate?" "Yes, ma'am. But you also testified that on the night of Stanley Ferguson's interrogation, you were not wearing any FBI recording equipment. Is that correct?" Craig felt the first stirring of unease. "That's correct. And you made the decision to attend that interrogation without FBI knowledge or approval?" "Yes. So, when you stood in that warehouse and watched my client question Mr. Ferguson, you were not acting as an FBI asset. You were acting as Craig Cooper, private citizen." "Correct. I suppose so, yes." Parsons smiled. "And as a private citizen, Mr. Cooper, you participated in the kidnapping and assault of Stanley Ferguson. You watched as he was tortured for information. You made no attempt to help him or to contact authorities. Is that accurate?" Quinn was on his feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. Compound question and assumes facts, not an evidence." Sustained. "Ms. Parsons, please rephrase." "Mr. Cooper, did you at any point during Mr. Ferguson's interrogation attempt to stop what was happening?" Craig stared at Blake's lawyer, realizing the trap she was setting. "No, I did not." "Did you at any point try to contact law enforcement to report what was happening?" "No." "Did you at any point express objection to what was being done to Mr. Ferguson?" "No." "In fact, isn't it true that you encouraged my client's actions? That you told him you wanted to look Ferguson in the eye when he revealed information about Elena Kozlov's assets?" Craig's mouth went dry. Blake's people had been recording their conversations too. I was maintaining my cover." "Your cover as what, Mr. Cooper? You just testified that you weren't acting as an FBI asset that night. So what cover were you maintaining?" Craig looked at Quinn, who was clearly preparing another objection, but the damage was already done. The jury had heard what they needed to hear. "I was trying to appear willing to participate so I could gather evidence. Evidence that would never be admissible in court because it was gathered illegally by a private citizen engaging in vigilante justice." "Objection. Withdrawn." Parsons smiled coldly. No further questions. Craig left the witness stand feeling like he'd been gutted. In the hallway outside the courtroom, Quinn tried to reassure him, but they both knew the defense had scored major points. "She's trying to make it seem like you and Blake were co-conspirators who had a falling out," Quinn explained. "The jury needs to understand that you were working undercover to bring Blake down." "But I wasn't, was I?" Craig said quietly. "That last night, I wasn't working undercover for the FBI. I was there for my own reasons." Quinn didn't answer immediately. "What were your reasons, Craig?" Craig thought about it. "I wanted to see Blake destroy himself. I wanted to watch him commit crimes so heinous that he'd never get out of prison." "And did that happen?" "Yes. Blake ordered Kelvin Maloney's murder on tape. He personally participated in torturing a federal agent. Whatever his lawyers argue, those are capital crimes. Then you accomplish your goal." Craig looked back toward the courtroom, where Blake was undoubtedly conferring with his expensive legal team. "Did I? Or did I just become as ruthless as he is?" The question haunted Craig through 3 more days of testimony. Elena took the stand and provided devastating evidence about Blake's criminal operation, confirming that he'd hired her specifically to target Craig. Ferguson testified about the systematic torture he'd endured, describing Blake's personal participation in graphic detail. But Blake's defense team kept returning to the same theme. Craig Cooper was not a hero, but a vigilante who had participated in serious crimes. They painted him as an architect who'd snapped after discovering his wife's betrayal and decided to take justice into his own hands. The worst part was that Craig wasn't entirely sure they were wrong. On the final day of testimony, Blake himself took the stand. His lawyers had tried to prevent it, but Blake insisted on speaking in his own defense. "I've been in construction and development for 25 years, Blake testified smoothly. "I've built shopping centers, office buildings, residential complexes. I provided jobs for thousands of people and homes for thousands more." The prosecutor, Assistant District Attorney Beverly Valencia, was clearly skeptical. "Mr. Root, are you denying that you operated a money laundering business?" "I'm saying that sometimes, in business, you work with people whose backgrounds aren't entirely clean. But that doesn't make me a criminal. What about the systematic destruction of Cooper Construction?" Blake's expression hardened slightly. "David Cooper's business failed because of poor decisions and market forces. I had nothing to do with that. But you've been recorded confessing to engineering that failure. I've been recorded having a conversation with a man who was secretly working with federal agents to entrap me. A man who participated in kidnapping and torture to get those recordings." Blake looked directly at Craig, who was sitting in the gallery. "Craig Cooper is not a victim in this case. He's a co-conspirator who made a deal with the government to avoid prosecution for his own crimes." The statement hung in the courtroom like an accusation. Craig felt every eye in the room turn to him, and for a moment, he wondered if Blake was right. Had Craig become the villain of his own story? Chapter 9, Justice Served. The jury deliberated for 18 hours across 3 days. Craig spent that time in a downtown hotel, avoiding the media circus and trying to process everything that had happened over the past 6 months. His quiet life as an architect was over. Win or lose, he'd be forever known as the man who went undercover to bring down his wife's criminal conspirator. Quinn called him on the morning of the 3rd day. "Jury's coming back. Whatever happens, Craig, you need to know that Blake Root is finished. Even if he beats the major charges, we've got him on enough federal counts to put him away for decades." Craig dressed carefully in his best suit, the same one he'd worn to his wedding to Elena. It seemed appropriate. Somehow, both occasions had been performances, carefully orchestrated deceptions with life-altering consequences. The courthouse was even more crowded than it had been during testimony. Blake's criminal associates, Elena's previous victims' families, federal agents, reporters, and curiosity seekers packed every available seat. Craig found a spot near the back, preferring to remain inconspicuous. Blake sat at the defense table looking confident and relaxed, as if this were just another business meeting. When the jury filed in, Craig tried to read their faces, but they were carefully neutral. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Muhammad Hodge asked. "We have, Your Honor." The foreman, a middle-aged man who'd worked construction most of his life, stood to read the verdict. Craig found himself holding his breath. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty." Blake's confident expression faltered slightly. "On the charge of operating a continuing criminal enterprise, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of money laundering in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of torture, we find the defendant guilty." The verdicts continued for 15 minutes. Guilty on every major charge. Guilty on most of the lesser charges. By the time the foreman finished reading, Blake Root was looking at multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. As the judge dismissed the jury and scheduled sentencing for the following month, Blake turned to look at Craig one final time. His expression was no longer predatory or confident. For the first time since Craig had met him, Blake Root looked like what he truly was, a defeated criminal facing the end of his life in federal prison. Craig expected to feel vindicated, triumphant, satisfied that justice had finally been served. Instead, he felt hollow. Blake Root was finished, but so was the person Craig had been before this all started. The architect who'd lived quietly and tried to build beautiful buildings was gone, replaced by someone who could watch torture without flinching. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed Craig despite Quinn's attempts to run interference. "How do you feel about the verdict, Mr. Cooper? Do you regret your decision to go undercover? What's next for you?" Craig paused on the courthouse steps, looking back at the building where Blake Root had just been convicted of crimes that would keep him locked away forever. "I'm glad Blake Root can't hurt anyone else," Craig said finally. "But I'm not sure justice can repair the damage he's already done. To my father, to his other victims, or to the people who became capable of stopping him." "Are you referring to yourself, Mr. Cooper?" Craig thought about the question. 6 months ago, he'd been a successful architect married to a woman he loved, believing his biggest problem was taking time off for a vacation. Now he was a federal witness whose testimony had helped convict multiple criminals, a man who'd watched torture and done nothing to stop it, someone who discovered that he was capable of ruthlessness when pushed far enough. "Yes," he said quietly, "I'm referring to myself." The media circus followed Craig for another month, until Blake's sentencing hearing provided a final act to the drama. Blake received 4 life sentences plus 300 years in federal prison. Elena received 2 life sentences. Her various associates, including the surviving members of Kelvin Maloney's crew, received sentences ranging from 20 years to life. Craig watched the sentencing from the back of the courtroom, and when it was over, he walked out into the Los Angeles sunshine, feeling something he hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not happiness. He wasn't sure he'd ever be truly happy again. But peace, the knowledge that Blake Root would never hurt another family the way he'd hurt the Coopers. That evening, Craig stood in his rebuilt home office, looking at the architectural drawings spread across his desk. The Morrison project was still waiting for his attention, just as Elena had predicted months ago. His life was still there, ready to be resumed. But Craig knew he could never truly go back. He'd learned too much about himself, about the thin line between justice and revenge, about the price of stopping truly evil people. His phone rang. "Quinn, I wanted to let you know, we got word that Elena's death sentence was commuted to life without parole. Apparently, her cooperation in the Blake Root case was considered a mitigating factor." "Good," Craig said, surprising himself. "She's a killer, but you're not." Craig thought about the question. "I don't know what I am anymore, Quinn. I know I'm not the same person I was 6 months ago. Maybe that's not a bad thing. The person you were 6 months ago would have let Blake Root destroy more families. The person you are now stopped him." After Quinn hung up, Craig walked to his living room window and looked out at the city lights of Los Angeles. Somewhere out there, Blake Root was beginning his first night of what would be decades in federal prison. Somewhere else, Elena Kozlov was doing the same. The conspiracy that had destroyed his father and nearly killed him was finally, definitively over. Craig poured himself a glass of whiskey, something he rarely did, and raised it in a silent toast. "To David Cooper," he said aloud. "Your son turned out to be stronger than either of us thought." As Craig drank the whiskey and planned his return to the business of designing buildings instead of destroying criminal enterprises, he realized that Blake Root had been wrong about one thing. There was a difference between Craig Cooper and the criminals he'd helped bring down. The difference was that Craig could still feel the weight of what he'd done. He could still be haunted by the choices he'd made. He could still care about the people he'd failed to save along the way. Blake Root had felt none of those things, which was why he deserved everything that happened to him. Craig Cooper would feel all of those things for the rest of his life, which was why he deserved the chance to build something better from the ruins of his old existence. It wasn't the ending Craig had imagined 6 months ago when he'd been planning a romantic trip to Paris with his loving wife. But it was the ending he'd earned, and perhaps that was its own form of justice. Outside his window, Los Angeles continued its restless sprawl beneath the night sky, a city full of people building dreams and others trying to destroy them. Craig Cooper had learned which side he belonged on, and now it was time to get back to work. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Facade. Damon Schaefer stood in the marble-floored foyer of his sprawling mansion, adjusting his Italian silk tie as he prepared for another day of commanding his construction empire. At 42, he had built Schaefer Industries from nothing into a multi-million-dollar company that dominated the Northeast commercial construction market. His steel-gray eyes reflected the same cold efficiency that had crushed countless competitors and earned him both respect and fear in equal measure. "Daddy!" 9-year-old Lily Schaefer bounded down the curved staircase, her blonde curls bouncing with each step. She was the one pure light in Damon's world, his daughter, conceived during what he believed were happier times with his wife Terry. "Princess," Damon's voice softened as he caught her in his arms. "Ready for your appointment with Mrs. Montoya?" Terry Schaefer emerged from the kitchen, her auburn hair perfectly styled and her designer dress clinging to her still attractive figure. At 38, she maintained the same beauty that had initially captivated Damon 15 years ago when she was a struggling art student and he was a young contractor hungry for success. "I'll take her to the salon," Terry said, not meeting Damon's eyes. "I have some errands to run afterward." Damon nodded curtly. Their marriage had grown cold over the past 2 years, though he attributed it to the stress of his expanding business. What he didn't know was that Terry had been carrying on an affair with Reynaldo Bean, Damon's former business partner who had tried to steal clients and start a competing firm 3 years prior. The salon, Aurelia's Touch, was owned by Aurelia Montoya, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who had been cutting hair for the wealthy families of their suburban Connecticut town for over 2 decades. She had watched marriages crumble and secrets spill across her salon chair, but she had never witnessed anything quite like what she was about to discover. As Lily settled into the styling chair, chattering about her upcoming school play, Aurelia began her usual routine of washing and sectioning the child's hair. But as she lifted a section near the back of Lily's head, her fingers detected something unusual, a small, raised scar hidden beneath the blonde strands. "Lily, sweetheart, have you had any accidents lately? Any falls?" Aurelia asked carefully. "No, Mrs. Montoya." "Why?" Aurelia's experienced, I recognized the precise, surgical nature of the scar. This wasn't from a childhood tumble or accident. This was from a medical procedure, one that had been deliberately concealed. "Wait a second." Aurelia's voice trailed off as she parted the hair more carefully. "Dad, this is—" She stopped mid-sentence, her face draining of color. The scar was small but unmistakable, the telltale mark of a subcutaneous tracking device implantation. Aurelia had seen similar scars before, but never on child. Her brother worked in private security, and she knew enough about surveillance technology to recognize the signs. "Dad, don't look," Lily whispered, sensing the tension in the room. But Damon had already moved closer, his trained eye immediately assessing the situation. Years of dealing with industrial espionage and corporate sabotage had taught him to recognize surveillance equipment. What he saw made his blood run cold. Without hesitation, he pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "This is Damon Schaefer. I need police and paramedics at Aurelia's Touch salon immediately. My daughter appears to have been implanted with a tracking device without my knowledge." As they waited for the authorities, Damon's mind raced. Only 3 people had regular access to Lily: himself, Terry, and their live-in nanny, Viola Wood. The procedure would have required medical knowledge and equipment. But more importantly, it would have required someone with a motive to track his daughter's movements. The first seeds of suspicion about his wife's true nature were beginning to sprout in Damon's calculating mind. Chapter 2. Unraveling Deceptions. Detective Gavin Cherry arrived at the salon within 20 minutes, his weathered face grim as he surveyed the scene. A veteran of the force with 15 years of experience in cybercrimes and family cases, he had seen his share of custody battles gone wrong, but this case immediately struck him as something more sinister. "Mr. Schaefer, I need to ask you some difficult questions," Detective Cherry said as paramedics carefully examined the device under Lily's skin. "Are you and your wife going through any marital difficulties? Any custody disputes?" Damon's jaw tightened. "My wife and I have our differences, but nothing that would warrant this." He gestured toward his daughter, who was being comforted by Aurelia while medical professionals worked. The paramedic, a young woman named Carrie Ray, looked up from her examination. Sir, this device appears to be a GPS tracker, but it's medical grade. Whoever implanted this had surgical training and access to specialized equipment. The procedure would have required sedation for a child this young. When would this have been done? Damon asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Based on a healing pattern, I'd estimate 2 to 3 weeks ago, Carrie replied. Damon's mind immediately went to the weekend 3 weeks prior, when Terry had taken Lily on what she claimed was a girls' trip to visit her sister in Boston. They had returned a day later than planned, with Terry explaining that Lily had come down with a stomach bug and needed to rest before traveling. Detective Cherry pulled Damon aside. Mr. Schaefer, I need to be direct with you. In cases like this, we usually find that one parent is planning to disappear with the child. The tracking device suggests someone wanted to monitor your daughter's location continuously. You think my wife is planning to kidnap my daughter? I think someone is planning something, and they wanted to make sure they could find her no matter where she went, Cherry replied. I need you to think carefully about any changes in your wife's behavior recently. Any new friendships, unexplained absences, financial irregularities. As Damon considered the detective's words, his phone buzzed with a text from Terry, running late with errands. We'll be home by dinner. Kiss Lily for me. For the first time in months, Damon paid attention to the timestamp and location data on his wife's messages. She had been sending these vague errand texts frequently, always with convenient excuses for extended absences. Detective, I need to show you something, Damon said, pulling up his phone's message history. My wife has been exhibiting a pattern of unexplained absences. I dismissed it as shopping trips or social activities, but now, Cherry studied the messages. Mr. Schaefer, I'm going to need you to be very careful about how you proceed. If your wife is planning to disappear with your daughter, confronting her directly could accelerate her timeline. We need to investigate this properly. What do you need from me? First, we need to have this device safely removed from your daughter. Then, I need you to act normal at home while we conduct surveillance. Don't let your wife know what we've discovered. The next few hours passed in a blur of medical procedures and police interviews. The tracking device was successfully removed, revealing a sophisticated GPS unit with cellular connectivity. The serial number traced back to a medical supply company in Boston, the same city where Terry had claimed to take Lily 3 weeks ago. As evening approached, Damon returned home with Lily, his daughter having been sworn to secrecy about the day's events. The 9-year-old, frightened by the adult conversation she had overheard, readily agreed to keep quiet. Terry greeted them at the door, her smile bright, but her eyes unable to meet Damon's directly. How was the salon, sweetheart? She asked Lily. Fine, Mommy. Mrs. Montoya gave me a new haircut. It looks beautiful, Terry said, her fingers briefly touching the area where the device had been hidden. If she noticed anything different, she didn't show it. That night, as Terry slept beside him, Damon lay awake staring at the ceiling. The woman he had married, the mother of his child, had violated their daughter in the most fundamental way. The tracking device wasn't just about monitoring location. It was about power, control, and preparation for theft. For the first time in his marriage, Damon Schaefer began planning not a business strategy, but a war. Chapter 3. The Surveillance Web. The next morning brought a facade of normalcy that felt like poison in Damon's veins. He sat at the breakfast table, watching Terry butter toast for Lily while internally cataloging every micro-expression, every hesitation, every tell that he had been blind to for months. Detective Cherry had been clear, maintain the status quo while they built their case. But Damon Schaefer had not built an empire by waiting for others to act. He had his own resources, his own methods, and his own sense of justice. After dropping Lily at school, Damon made a call to Floyd Livingston, his head of security at Schaefer Industries. Floyd was a former military intelligence operative who had helped Damon navigate corporate espionage attempts and union troubles over the years. Floyd, I need you to set up comprehensive surveillance on my wife, Damon said without preamble. I want to know where she goes, who she sees, and what she does every minute of every day. Boss, that's a hell of a request. You sure about this? Someone implanted a tracking device in my daughter's head, Floyd. I'm sure about everything right now. Within hours, Floyd had assembled a team of 3 investigators and equipped them with the latest surveillance technology. They would maintain a discreet distance, documenting Terry's movements without alerting her to their presence. Meanwhile, Damon reached out to another old contact, Othis Sampson, a forensic accountant who specialized in uncovering hidden assets and financial fraud. If Terry was planning to disappear with Lily, she would need money, and that money would leave a trail. Otha, I need you to analyze every financial transaction my wife has made in the past 6 months, Damon instructed. Look for cash withdrawals, new accounts, unusual purchases, anything that suggests preparation for flight. How deep do you want me to go, Damon? All the way to the bottom. I want to know if she's been stockpiling resources. By noon, the first surveillance reports were coming in. Terry had driven to a coffee shop in the next town over, where she met with a man Floyd's team identified as Reynaldo Bean. The meeting lasted 45 minutes, during which both appeared agitated and argumentative. Reynaldo Bean. The name hit Damon like a physical blow. His former business partner, the man who had tried to steal clients and destroy Schaefer Industries 3 years ago. The man Damon had crushed so thoroughly that Bean had been forced to declare bankruptcy and leave the construction business entirely. Son of a bitch, Damon muttered, staring at the surveillance photos on his phone. Reynaldo looked older, worn down by financial stress, but his eyes held the same cunning that had made him a dangerous adversary years ago. The pieces were falling into place with horrible clarity. Terry and Reynaldo weren't just having an affair. They were conspirators. The tracking device in Lily's head was part of a larger plan, one that would allow them to monitor and control his daughter's location even after they disappeared. Otha's preliminary financial analysis arrived that afternoon, revealing a pattern of suspicious activities. Over the past 4 months, Terry had been making regular cash withdrawals of $500 to $1,000, always from different ATMs and always on days when she claimed to be running errands. The total amount approached $15,000, enough to fund a disappearance, but not enough to trigger automatic reporting requirements. More damning still, Otha had discovered that Terry had opened a new bank account in Boston under her maiden name, Terry Brock. The account had been funded with a $25,000 deposit 3 weeks ago, the same weekend she had taken Lily to visit her sister. They're planning to run, Damon told Floyd over the phone. The question is when. Based on what we're seeing, boss, I'd say soon. Bean looked desperate in those photos, and your wife is showing all the signs of someone preparing for a major life change. That evening, Damon watched his wife serve dinner with new eyes. Every smile felt calculated, every gentle touch with Lily felt like a manipulation. Terry was preparing to steal his daughter, and she was doing it with the help of his greatest enemy. But Damon Schaefer had not survived the cutthroat world of construction by being passive. He had built his empire by anticipating his enemies' moves and crushing them before they could strike. As Terry kissed Lily goodnight, Damon made a decision that would change everything. He would not wait for the police to build their case. He would not trust the courts to protect his daughter. He would take matters into his own hands. And when he was finished, neither Terry nor Reynaldo would ever threaten his family again. The war was about to begin. Chapter 4. The Trap Takes Shape. 3 days of surveillance had revealed the full scope of Terry and Reynaldo's plan. They met daily at different locations, a park, a library, a shopping mall, always maintaining the appearance of casual encounters while exchanging what appeared to be detailed information. Floyd's team had managed to plant listening devices in both Terry's car and Reynaldo's apartment, providing Damon with a chilling window into their conspiracy. The passport documents will be ready Friday. Reynaldo's voice crackled through the recording Floyd played for Damon. I've got contacts in Montreal who can help us disappear completely. What about the money? Terry's voice, usually soft and melodious, carried a hard edge Damon had never heard before. The insurance policy will pay out once they find the body. $2 million, tax-free. Enough to set us up for life. Damon's blood turned to ice. Insurance policy. Body. They weren't just planning to kidnap Lily. They were planning to kill him. Floyd, I need you to give me everything on their insurance plans, Damon said, his voice deadly calm. and I need you to find out who's helping them with the passport fraud. The investigation revealed a web of corruption that went deeper than Damon had imagined. Reynaldo had made contact with a document forger named Christopher Ponce, a man with connections to organized crime families in Boston. Ponce specialized in creating new identities for people who needed to disappear permanently. More shocking still, Otha's financial analysis revealed that Terry had taken out a $2 million life insurance policy on Damon 6 months ago, forging his signature on the documents. The policy included a double indemnity clause for accidental death, meaning she would receive $4 million if Damon died in what appeared to be an accident. "They're going to kill me, take my daughter, and disappear with $4 million, Damon summarized to Floyd. "And they're going to do it soon. Boss, we need to call the police. This is way beyond corporate espionage." "No," Damon said firmly. "The police move too slowly, and the courts are too forgiving. By the time they build a case, Terry and Reynaldo will have executed their plan. My daughter will be gone, and I'll be dead. So what do you want to do?" "I want to give them exactly what they're expecting, an accident. But they're going to be the ones who don't survive it." Damon's plan began to take shape over the next 24 hours. He would use his enemy's own strategy against them, turning their trap into his revenge. But first, he needed to ensure Lily's safety. That evening, Damon called his sister Blanca Schaefer-Knox, who lived in California with her husband and 2 children. Blanca was a successful pediatrician who had always adored Lily and would protect her without question. "Blanca, I need you to do something for me without asking questions," Damon said during their phone call. "I need you to come to Connecticut and take Lily back to California with you for an extended visit." "Damon, what's wrong? You sound different." "I can't explain right now, but Lily is in danger. I need her as far away from here as possible." Blanca, hearing the genuine fear in her brother's voice, agreed immediately. She would arrive Friday morning and take Lily back to California that afternoon under the guise of a surprise vacation. With his daughter's safety secured, Damon turned his attention to the final phase of his plan. He would give Terry and Reynaldo their opportunity to kill him, but he would be ready for them. And when the dust settled, they would be the ones who disappeared permanently. On Thursday evening, Damon made his move. He called Reynaldo directly, something he hadn't done in 3 years. "Bean, this is Damon Schaefer. I have a proposition for you." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "What kind of proposition?" "The kind that could make us both a lot of money. Meet me at the old construction site on Route 7 tomorrow night at midnight. Come alone, and we'll discuss it." After hanging up, Damon called Floyd. "It's time to end this." Chapter 5. The Point of No Return. Friday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of autumn in New England. Damon watched from his office window as Blanca's rental car pulled into his driveway, his sister's familiar figure emerging to collect Lily for their surprise vacation. The goodbye was more difficult than Damon had anticipated. Lily, excited about her unexpected trip to California, hugged him tightly at the door. "I'll miss you, Daddy," she whispered. "I'll miss you too, Princess. Be good for Aunt Blanca, and remember that Daddy loves you more than anything in the world." Terry, who had been unusually quiet all morning, watched the departure with barely concealed anxiety. "I wish you had discussed this with me first," she said as Blanca's car disappeared down the street. "She's my daughter too, Terry. She'll be back in a few weeks." What Terry didn't know was that Blanca had instructions to keep Lily in California indefinitely, and that Damon had already initiated legal proceedings to establish temporary custody with his sister. By the time Terry realized what had happened, it would be too late. That afternoon, Floyd's surveillance team reported increased activity from both Terry and Reynaldo. They had met 3 times, always in different locations, and their conversations had grown increasingly urgent. "They know something's changed," Floyd reported to Damon. "Your wife has been making phone calls all day, and Bean's been driving around like he's checking for surveillance." "Good. Let them sweat. Fear makes people careless." The final piece of Damon's plan involved Antoine Clay, a demolition expert who had worked on several of Schaefer Industries' projects. Antoine was a man who understood both the legal and illegal applications of explosives, and he owed Damon several favors from past business dealings. I need you to set up a controlled demolition at the Route 7 site, Damon instructed Antoine. Make it look like an industrial accident, but give me a safe zone where I can observe and escape if necessary. Boss, this sounds dangerous. You sure you know what you're doing? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As evening approached, Damon made his final preparations. He had equipped himself with a bulletproof vest, a concealed recording device, and a secure communication link to Floyd's team. The abandoned construction site on Route 7 was perfect for his purposes, isolated, filled with heavy machinery, and officially closed for safety violations. At 11:30 p.m., Damon arrived at the site and positioned himself in the main trailer, which had been rigged with Antoine's explosives. The demolition would be triggered remotely, giving him time to escape while ensuring that anyone else in the immediate area would not survive. Reynaldo arrived promptly at midnight, his car's headlights cutting through the darkness as he navigated the rough access road. He parked 50 yards from the trailer and approached cautiously, clearly nervous about the meeting. "Schaefer," he called out. "I'm here. Come into the trailer, Bean. We need privacy for this conversation." Reynaldo hesitated, then walked toward the trailer. As he climbed the metal steps, Damon activated his recording device. "I have to admit, I'm surprised you called me," Reynaldo said as he entered the trailer. "Last time we spoke, you threatened to destroy me." "I did destroy you," Damon replied coldly. "But circumstances change. I understand you've been spending time with my wife." Reynaldo's face went pale. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Cut the bullshit, Bean. I know about the affair. I know about the tracking device you had implanted in my daughter's head. I know about the insurance policy and the forged passport documents. You're fishing. You don't know anything. I know you're planning to kill me, steal my daughter, and disappear with $4 million. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Reynaldo's hand moved slowly toward his jacket pocket, where Floyd's surveillance had confirmed he carried a .38 revolver. "The way I see it," Damon continued, "you have two choices. You can confess everything, provide evidence against my wife, and disappear from my life forever. Or you could try to complete your original plan and see what happens." "What kind of evidence?" "Recordings, documents, testimony. Everything I need to prove that Terry orchestrated this entire scheme." Reynaldo's hand stopped moving toward his weapon. "And if I cooperate, you get to live. You get enough money to start over somewhere far away. And you never see me or my family again. How do I know you won't kill me anyway?" Damon smiled coldly. "Because I'm not you, Bean. I don't murder people for money. I destroy them legally and completely." For a moment, it seemed as though Reynaldo might accept the offer. But then his hand resumed its movement toward his gun, and Damon knew that words were no longer sufficient. The next few seconds would determine whether Damon Schaefer lived or died. Chapter 6: Blood and Betrayal. Reynaldo's hand cleared his jacket pocket, the .38 revolver reflecting the dim light of the trailer's single bulb. But Damon had been expecting this moment, and his own weapon, a .45 automatic, was already in his hand. "Don't be stupid, Bean," Damon said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "You're not a killer. You're a coward who hides behind other people's plans. You destroyed my life." Reynaldo snarled, his gun shaking in his grip. "You took everything from me. I took what you tried to steal from me. There's a difference. After tonight, none of that will matter. Terry and I will have your daughter, your money, and your life." "No," Damon said quietly. "You won't." The standoff stretched for several seconds, both men holding their weapons steady. Then Reynaldo made his mistake. He glanced toward the trailer door, checking his escape route. Damon fired twice, both bullets hitting Reynaldo's center mass. The man dropped to the trailer floor, his revolver clattering across the metal surface. "Floyd, Phase 1 complete." Damon spoke into his communication device. "Initiate Phase 2. Outside the trailer, car headlights suddenly blazed alive. Terry's BMW pulled into the construction site, exactly as Damon had anticipated. She had been waiting nearby, ready to assist in his murder. Damon quickly moved Reynaldo's body to the corner of the trailer, then positioned himself where he could observe Terry's approach. She parked near Reynaldo's car and stepped out, carrying what appeared to be a gasoline can. "Rinaldo," she called out. "Is it finished? Come into the trailer." "Terry," Damon replied, disguising his voice in the darkness. "There's been a complication." Terry approached the trailer cautiously, the gasoline sloshing in her grip. She climbed the steps and entered the doorway, where she froze at the sight of her husband sitting calmly in a chair, his gun resting on the table before him. "Hello, wife," Damon said, his voice carrying a weight of betrayal and rage. "I've been waiting for you." "Damon, I can explain." "Can you? Can you explain why you had a tracking device implanted in our daughter's head? Can you explain the forged insurance policy? Can you explain why you're carrying gasoline to burn down the evidence of my murder?" Terry's composure cracked completely. "He made me do it. Rinaldo said it was the only way." "Where is he, Terry? Where's your lover?" She looked around the trailer wildly, then spotted Rinaldo's body in the corner. Her scream echoed through the metal structure. "He's dead, Terry. Just like you're going to be. You can't kill me. I'm the mother of your child." "You stopped being the mother of my child the moment you chose to betray her," Damon said, standing up slowly. "You were going to take her away from me. You were going to steal her life, her identity, her future. We weren't going to hurt her. We just needed her cooperation." "Cooperation? You violated her body, Terry. You had a foreign object surgically implanted in her head without her knowledge or consent. You turned our daughter into a tracked animal." The full horror of what she had done seemed to hit Terry for the first time. I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you don't love her. You love money. You love excitement. You love the idea of destroying me. But you don't love our daughter." "That's not true." "Prove it," Damon challenged. "Tell me where the forged passport documents are. Tell me who else is involved in this conspiracy. Help me clean up the mess you've made." Terry stared at him for a long moment. Then her expression hardened. "Go to hell, Damon. Even if you kill me, you'll never prove I was involved in any of this." "I don't need to prove anything to anyone except myself," Damon replied. "And I already have all the evidence I need." He activated the recording device he had used with Rinaldo, playing back her confession about the tracking device and the insurance policy. Her own voice filled the trailer, damning her beyond any possibility of denial. "You recorded everything," she whispered. "Everything. Your affair, your plans, your motives. The police will find this recording along with all the other evidence I've gathered. Then why kill me? Why not just turn me over to the authorities?" Damon's smile was cold as winter steel. "Because the authorities would give you a chance to see my daughter again. They would give you a chance to corrupt her, to poison her mind against me. They would give you a chance to hurt her again. I would never hurt Lily. You already have, Terry. You hurt her in the most fundamental way possible, and I will never forgive you for that." The final confrontation between husband and wife lasted only seconds. When it was over, Damon stood alone in the trailer with two bodies and the weight of absolute justice on his shoulders. He activated the demolition charges Antoine had placed throughout the site. The explosion would destroy the trailer and everything in it, making the deaths appear to be the result of an industrial accident. The insurance companies would investigate, but they would find no evidence of murder, only the tragic end of two people who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. As Damon walked away from the burning construction site, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years: complete peace. His enemies were dead, his daughter was safe, and justice had been served. The war was over. Chapter 7: Ashes and Absolution. The explosion lit up the Connecticut countryside like a small sun, visible for miles in every direction. By the time the fire department arrived, the construction site was a smoldering crater, and the trailer that had contained Damon's enemies was nothing more than twisted metal and ash. Damon watched the emergency response from a hill overlooking the site, his secure communication link crackling with updates from Floyd's team. The plan had worked perfectly. The demolition charges had destroyed all evidence of murder while creating a plausible industrial accident. "Boss, the fire marshal's initial assessment is calling it a gas leak explosion," Floyd reported. "They're treating it as an accident pending investigation." "Good. Make sure our cleanup team handles any loose ends." "Already on it. The surveillance equipment has been removed and all our electronic traces have been wiped. Within hours, the story dominated local news. Construction site explosion kills two, the headlines read. Reynaldo Bean and Terry Schaefer, described as business associates reviewing property development, had been tragically killed in what appeared to be an industrial accident. Damon returned home to an empty house that felt more peaceful than it had in months. The silence was broken only by his phone ringing. Detective Cherry, calling with news of the explosion. Mr. Schaefer, I'm sorry to inform you that your wife was killed in an industrial accident tonight, Cherry said, his voice professionally sympathetic. She was at a construction site with a man named Reynaldo Bean when there was an explosion. My God, Damon replied, injecting just the right amount of shock into his voice. Are you certain it was Terry? We'll need you to make a formal identification, but yes, sir. I'm very sorry for your loss. I don't understand. What was she doing at a construction site? That's what we're trying to determine. Mr. Bean was apparently considering purchasing the property for development. Your wife may have been there in a professional capacity. The investigation that followed was thorough, but ultimately fruitless. The insurance companies, suspicious of the convenient timing of Terry's death, hired private investigators to look for evidence of fraud. They found nothing. Damon's planning had been too meticulous, his execution too perfect. More importantly, they discovered the evidence Damon had carefully planted for them. Bank records showing that Terry had been embezzling money from her husband's business accounts, forged documents indicating that she had been planning to flee the country, and communications suggesting that she had been involved in industrial espionage. It appears Mrs. Schaefer was not the woman you thought you married, Detective Cherry told Damon during one of their interviews. We found evidence that she was involved in some very serious criminal activities. I'm shocked, Damon replied. I thought I knew her completely. Unfortunately, Mr. Schaefer, people aren't always what they seem. The good news is that with both conspirators dead, your daughter is safe from any further threats. 3 weeks after the explosion, Damon flew to California to bring Lily home. His daughter, who had been told only that her mother had died in an accident, was struggling with grief and confusion. Daddy, why did Mommy have to die? She asked as they sat in Blanca's garden. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, Princess. But I want you to know that Mommy loved you very much, and she would want you to be happy. It was a lie, but it was a necessary one. Lily would never know the truth about her mother's betrayal, about the tracking device, or about the plan to steal her away from her father. She would grow up believing that Terry had been a loving mother who died tragically, and Damon would make sure that fiction became her reality. Are we going to be okay, Daddy? We're going to be better than okay, Damon promised. We're going to be a family again. Chapter 8. The New Order. 6 months after the explosion, Damon had rebuilt his life according to his own rigid specifications. Lily had adjusted well to her new reality, aided by a carefully selected child psychologist who helped her process her grief without questioning the official version of events. The financial aftermath of Terry's death had been complex but ultimately favorable. The insurance companies, despite their suspicions, had been forced to pay out on her life insurance policy. Not the forged $4 million policy, which was discovered and voided, but her legitimate $500,000 policy that predated the conspiracy. Additionally, Damon had been able to recover the money she had stolen and hidden in various accounts. More satisfying still, the investigation into Terry's criminal activities had revealed a network of corruption that extended far beyond her affair with Reynaldo. The document forger, Christopher Ponce, had been arrested and was now serving a 10-year federal sentence. Several other accomplices had been identified and prosecuted, effectively dismantling the entire criminal enterprise. Boss, we've got a problem, Floyd announced during one of their regular security meetings. Reynaldo Bean had a brother, Delbert Bean. He's been asking questions about the explosion. Damon looked up from the construction contracts he had been reviewing. What kind of questions? He's been talking to reporters, private investigators, anyone who will listen. He's convinced that his brother was murdered. And what evidence does he have? None that we can identify. But he's persistent, and he's got enough money to cause trouble. Damon considered this development carefully. Delbert Bean had been a successful accountant who had managed to avoid being dragged down by his brother's failures. He was intelligent, methodical, and potentially dangerous if he continued his investigation. Set up a meeting with him, Damon decided. Let's see what he really wants. The meeting took place at a neutral location, a coffee shop in downtown Hartford. Delbert Bean was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who looked nothing like his deceased brother. Where Reynaldo had been stocky and aggressive, Delbert was precise and calculating, perhaps more dangerous in his own way. Mr. Schaefer, thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Delbert said, his voice carefully modulated. I know this must be difficult, given that my brother died alongside your wife. I'm still processing the tragedy myself, Damon replied. What can I do for you? I've been investigating the circumstances of Reynaldo's death, and I've found some inconsistencies. Damon kept his expression neutral. What kind of inconsistencies? Financial records show that Reynaldo had been receiving regular payments from an offshore account. The payment stopped exactly 1 week before his death. And you think this is significant? I think someone was paying my brother to do something, and when that something was completed, they eliminated him to cover their tracks. Damon studied Delbert's face, looking for tells and weaknesses. That's a serious accusation. Do you have any evidence to support it? I have bank records, communication logs, and witness statements. I also have reason to believe that your wife was not the innocent victim she appeared to be. Mr. Bean, I'm going to stop you right there, Damon said, his voice hardening. My wife died in a tragic accident. Whatever theories you've developed about conspiracy or murder, you need to keep them to yourself. Or what? Or you'll discover that some investigations are more dangerous than others. Delbert leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Damon's face. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Schaefer. It's a warning. Your brother made the mistake of thinking he could destroy me once before. I wouldn't want you to repeat his errors. So you admit there was bad blood between you and Reynaldo? I admit that your brother was a failed business partner who tried to steal from me. Beyond that, I have nothing more to say. Delbert stood up slowly, leaving a folder on the table. Mr. Schaefer, I've compiled everything I've discovered about my brother's death. I'm going to continue investigating, and if I find evidence of foul play, I'll take it to the authorities. That's your choice, Mr. Bean. But I'd suggest you be very careful about making accusations you can't prove. After Delbert left, Damon opened the folder and reviewed its contents. The man had been thorough, too thorough. He had identified several of the financial transactions that could potentially be traced back to Damon's operation, and he had even obtained witness statements from people who had seen Terry and Reynaldo together. Floyd, we have a problem, Damon said during his next call. Delbert Bean is more dangerous than his brother ever was. What do you need me to do? I need you to make him understand that some investigations should be abandoned. Chapter 9. The Final Reckoning. 2 weeks after his meeting with Delbert Bean, Damon received a phone call that changed everything. It was Detective Cherry, and his voice carried a weight that immediately put Damon on alert. Mr. Schaefer, I need you to come to the station. We have some new developments in your wife's case. What kind of developments? I'd rather discuss this in person. An hour later, Damon sat across from Detective Cherry in the same interview room where they had first discussed the tracking device found in Lily's head. This time, however, the atmosphere was distinctly different. Mr. Schaefer, we've received some new information about the explosion that killed your wife, Cherry began. Information that suggests the incident may not have been accidental. What kind of information? Delbert Bean has provided us with evidence that his brother was being blackmailed by someone with access to industrial explosives. He believes that person used Reynaldo to lure your wife to the construction site, then eliminated both of them. Damon kept his expression carefully neutral. That's a very elaborate theory. It's more than a theory. Mr. Bean has bank records showing regular payments from an offshore account, communications suggesting coercion, and witness statements placing both victims at the scene under suspicious circumstances. Detective, I've already told you everything I know about my wife's activities. If she was involved in something illegal, I wasn't aware of it. Mr. Schaefer, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you have any involvement in the deaths of your wife and Reynaldo Bean? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Damon had been preparing for this moment since the night of the explosion, but actually facing it was different than he had anticipated. Detective, I love my wife despite our problems. I would never have hurt her. That's not what I asked you. Then let me be clear. I had no involvement in the explosion that killed my wife and Reynaldo Bean. It was technically true. Damon had not been involved in the explosion itself. He had been involved in the murders that preceded it, but the actual demolition had been carried out by remote detonation after he had left the scene. Mr. Schaefer, I need to inform you that you're a person of interest in this investigation. You have the right to legal representation. Am I under arrest? Not at this time, but I would strongly advise you to retain counsel. That evening, Damon sat in his study, staring at the phone number for the best criminal defense attorney in the state. Ronald Gaines had built his reputation defending wealthy clients accused of white-collar crimes, and he had never lost a murder case. But before making that call, Damon had another conversation to arrange. Floyd, I need you to set up a meeting with Delbert Bean. Tonight. Somewhere private. Boss, that's not a good idea. The police are watching him now. Then we'll have to be creative about it. The meeting took place in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of Hartford, chosen specifically because it was scheduled for demolition the following week. Delbert arrived alone, as instructed, but his nervous energy suggested he was prepared for trouble. Mr. Bean, thank you for coming, Damon said, emerging from the shadows. I think it's time we had an honest conversation. I'm wearing a wire, Delbert said immediately. If anything happens to me, the police will have everything they need. I'm sure you are, but I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to offer you a deal. What kind of deal? The kind that lets you walk away from this investigation alive and wealthy. Damon pulled out a briefcase and opened it, revealing neat stacks of $100 bills. $500,000, Mr. Bean. More than enough to start a new life somewhere far away from Connecticut. You're trying to buy my silence. I'm trying to save your life. Your brother thought he could destroy me, and you see how that worked out for him. So you admit you killed him? I admit that people who threaten my family tend to have accidents. Your brother was planning to kidnap my daughter and kill me for insurance money. What would you have done in my position? Delbert stared at the money for several seconds. And if I take this and disappear, then you live happily ever after. You use the money to start over, and you never mention my name or my family again. And if I don't, then you'll discover that some investigations are more dangerous than others. For a long moment, the two men stared at each other across the briefcase full of money. Finally, Delbert reached out and closed the case. I'll need guarantees, he said. Written assurances that my safety will be protected. You'll have them. But understand this, Mr. Bean. If you ever try to renege on our agreement, if you ever come after me or my daughter again, there won't be enough money in the world to protect you. Understand? Good. Then we have a deal. 3 days later, Delbert Bean withdrew his cooperation from the police investigation and disappeared. Detective Cherry, lacking sufficient evidence to proceed without his key witness, was forced to close the case as an unsolved industrial accident. 6 months later, Damon Schaefer stood in his daughter's bedroom, watching her sleep peacefully. Lily had grown taller, her blonde hair now reaching her shoulders, and she had developed the same steel-gray eyes that had served her father so well in business. She was safe, she was protected, and she would never know the truth about the monsters who had tried to steal her away. Damon had built his empire through ruthless efficiency and uncompromising principles. He had applied those same qualities to protecting his daughter, and the results spoke for themselves. His enemies were dead, his family was secure, and justice had been served according to his own unforgiving code. As he turned